All right, welcome back. So what we're going to talk about now is we're talking about mapping the shadows. So this right here, I have the contour drawn of my pear, and this pear I'm going to show you the pear I was drawing from, since we're dealing with the shadow shapes. But I've got my contour drawing. You can see the stem. The contour drawing comes around here. There's an overlap. This here, I didn't deal with that overlap as much as I should have, but that's all right. We're looking at something very different, so it doesn't matter that it's not quite there. But this is where this comes into the bulb. This is a definite plane change because this is a ridge. And so this overlaps and this ridge comes here as far as that goes. And this comes down under the foot, comes down. There's the foot tucks here. It has a foot that's in front and then another foot that's behind. 3 little feet, a fourth if you could actually see through it, because there's another one like this on the other side that's kind of go around the flower that was once the flower of the pear. This comes up. Okay, this does show the overlap. This was a much bigger overlap than this, so I included that, and this comes up. Now remember, this is the most important, one of the more important parts that sometimes we get wrong. Remember that there's a slight ridge, that this stem is down inside that ridge, and so because it's, and we have the light from, if you look at the photograph, we have the light it's not quite side lit. So we'd see a little bit of the ellipse, meaning it's not, if it was completely side lit, remember it'd be just a flat pointer. The ellipse would flatten out. That means that it's truly what we'd call profile light, side lit. So this right here is our light. Okay, so it's in a little bit on the front, but mostly on the side. That's why our ellipse is so, you know, it's a tight little ellipse here that we've got. And what this is kind of supposed to be like a little dowel or a little stick that's in a cone, and the cone shows the direction of the light. Okay. So it's coming over here. Because of that, we have 2 colors here. I should probably talk about that too. I had the dark blue is the shadow, everything that's truly in shadow. Now this is reflected light, but this is also, it almost looks like it's this blue, but it's not. It's actually this blue here. So maybe I should just go ahead and change its color a little bit by doing this, so that it's not confused to be in this family over here. But this is everything over here is in shadow. This is where it gets complicated, because this comes over and this starts to go into light. That's what these 2 little lighter areas are, and this is the shadow. Now this is the entire shadow family. It's just that there's a very distinct reflected light, so I showed that. But this whole thing, including this, all of this is the shadow shape. And then all of this lighter green, it's kind of a teal green. Not quite a turquoise, but anyways, it's a blue-green. This is the light. So we have the dark blue, and then we have the light. Now we're going to talk about the shadow shapes. The reason this is so important is because this is the front side that is lit. This is the back side that's in shadow. Then as it comes around, this right here is the cast shadow of the stem. It merges the shadow shape over into this little dish. This over here is in light. That over here is in light. Now they would be middle values, but they're still in the light. Remember, the middle values are in the light. So even this down here on the stem shows the shadow coming under the stem, and then down here, like so. This is the lit side, this is the shadow side. And we want to start mapping that. Now for the shadows, because they can sometimes be pretty complex, but if we break them down into simple shapes, it's much easier to look at it. Now, if I straightened this out, this has sort of a triangular shape up here on the cone, and then it has basically sort of a modified crescent here, but that's super simple. It's much more complex than that. But be aware of its basic shape. It has to, if I straighten all this out, there's my rectangle. If I straighten all this out, there's my crescent. All right, But so we have to have that. That's got to have the basic, this has got to become that shape, those basic shapes. But from there, what we look for is basic alphanumeric or geometric shapes. So we're either looking for a circle or a square or a triangle, or we're looking for a number, or we're looking for a letter. Okay, we're pretty much aware of alphanumeric shapes, meaning numbers and letters, because we do so much of that with our writing and everything else. And so as I was looking at the shadow, and if I simplify the shadow, this became a C curve right there. Okay, it's a reverse C curve, but it's a C curve. This was then a straight, or you could say it's a number 1 or a letter I. Not number 1, because usually I think of that it has a little whatever. So, but this is just really straight, like a letter I or something, or a straight line. If we want to go that route, that's fine. Then what we've got here is we've got like this open U shape that's on its side. And then we have, again, this little tail, and then what do we have here? Another U shape or a reverse C curve, whichever, it doesn't matter. And then there was a little tail, and there was also a little straight, and then it came down, and then it came out. Now, I didn't have to worry. This is basically a ba-bump, right? And it almost, if I attach it to here, it starts to look like a very soft number 3. But I just went ahead and said, there's sort of a tight C curve there, C curve, C curve, C curve. When we start thinking of those types of things, it becomes much easier. C curve, 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 straight, straight. Okay, so very, very simple. These puzzle pieces are going to help me, and I want to do what's called mapping. This is called mapping. We're going to map the basic shadow shapes. You need it to give you as much information, but also be as simple as possible. If you start putting because there's all kinds of stuff going on here I left out. If you start putting these little map puzzle pieces everywhere, you're going to get lost because it's so complex. So you want to keep it simple to a point. Like again, there was little tiny kind of little bits that came off of here that I ignored, I cut off. You're basically going to take your eyes out of focus and draw what you see out of focus, ignoring all the little stuff will disappear. And you'll see just the big stuff. This over here, again, this is just a very soft curve. There's a little V right there. There was a soft C curve there and another soft C curve there. Came over, there was a U shape, there was another U shape, a straight, a V, straight, straight, C curve, straight, over. The basic shape, though, was basically, if we straighten this out, this looks like just sort of an irregular polygon. It comes up, it comes down, it comes down, it comes over. That's our basic shape of this thing. Now, obviously, it's more complex than that, but we have to have that shape in there. If this right here is not the basic shape of all those little undulations, then it's not right. I have to think about that basic, what is the basic shape? Now, it's round. This is rounding over a round area, so that's why this is not a straight line. This is rounding across another. There's a rounding area here that kind of does this, sort of like this, right there. And again, that's why this is coming down. It's rounding around that area, and then this is rounding around the bottom side. So you're going to look for as best you can for the shapes that you see. Now you can take a look at mine and after you've drawn yours and see if it's right, or if you're seeing the same thing. Sometimes you'll see things slightly different, that's fine. Usually by the time you shade, a lot of times you'll kind of get to the same place. Sometimes artists will map, because what I'm doing is I'm really taking, these are middle values and light middle values, dark middle values and light middle values that I've all put into the same family. But if I start fracturing these, this is the dark middle value and these are the light, all of a sudden I start to get too many pieces and I get lost. I can much more easily divide these when I'm shading them, but I know where I'm at. These anchor me to where I'm at. So this is a middle value, middle value, middle value. These are light values and light middle values, because again, I've merged some of those. These ones right here, these little tiny things, people will call these islands. Some people like to give nice little names of this. Some people call this concept continents, the bigger land masses, and islands. and you want mostly continents, less islands. But all that, I mean, all these are highlights. There's a highlight there. It's much softer, obviously, but I have to make a definite decision. What's that shape? What's the definite decision of that? What's that shape? This actually kind of comes out a little bit more, so I actually modify that. But I do that when I'm drawing. It's not a big deal. This is just so I can get started. This is just so I kind of know what's going on. Again, this would be very light, so it would be very malleable. I could easily shift this line over, pull it back. Because again, this would be very, very light. It'd be drawn, this is a different object, this is a cone, but it'd be drawn very lightly like that. Pardon me, maybe a little darker, but again, very, very light. So I could just go ahead and I could get started on that. So again, you're going to want to map this out. Again, this is dark values and dark tones. Pardon me, I just said dark values and dark tones, so this is the same thing. These are the core shadow and the dark tones together. This is even cast shadow. So I've merged three families into this one shape. This reflected light is very important, so I went ahead and I singled it out. Normally, if I was painting, this would all be one shape. I wouldn't single that out. I would do that with a brush stroke. But we're drawing, we're not painting, so we have to be a little bit more aware. These right here, again, are middle values, light middle values and dark middle values pushed together. And the reason this is dark is because this is a plane that's going away from me like this, down and away, and this plane here is coming up and towards the light. That's why this is going to be darker, this will be lighter. So I am doing this to understand better what's happening on the pear. This little highlight is on the ridge. The ridge of the pear is, the top ridge of this pear does this. It's a little more round than that, it's a little more irregular, but it's because there is a definite shelf, and that's where this highlight is hitting, is off that shelf. Okay? And so there's obviously going to be, this would be lighter value, this would be probably a little, you know, a little light middle value there, this would be light value up here, this would be highlight. So that's what these little ones are. This is the highlight up here that's soft. There's even tiny little highlight along here. Now you got to be careful up here because it gets darker because of pigmentation. All right, we're going to try to ignore the pigmentation and all the little details and instead look for what the object is, as if it was painted with white paint. We wouldn't see any dots, we wouldn't see any freckles, we wouldn't see anything like that. We would just see the basic typography. Does it get lighter as it goes up and then over as it turns from the light? That's what we're trying to do with this. We're trying to map this as close as possible. So, and then this is just our cast shadow. Very, very, very simply, just kind of thrown in there. This is what we have to do. We have to map our shadows. With drawing the sphere, it was easy because all we have is a circle. So as long as we could draw the circle, then all we had to worry about once we had the circle drawn is a crescent of some sort. Simple. This is much more complex. So again, we're going to look at the thing with our eyes out of focus. We're going to start, again, when I would start this, I'd actually start with just the basic shape of this. So if I had my pear, let's say this was, I'm going to make this into my pear. Let's say this was the original little drawing of my pear over here. I'm just going to really quickly, this is going to be a caricature of this, but let's say I drew, my little pear like so. Well, then what I would do is I would go ahead and when I was starting this, is I would start again with just the basic shape. So this comes here, rounds over, comes up, rounds over. This then comes down. I would do this very lightly. This comes down here, and this comes down here, and that goes there, okay? That's the basic shape. And then I would come in here and go, okay, and this comes here, and this comes out there, and this then comes here. Start with your basic shape and then cut into it. This actually is too far over this way. This actually needs to come over here. See, this is why this is what you do when you keep it simple. It's much harder to do this if you've gone and painstakingly taking 20 minutes to map all this out. This needed to move. So, if I look at this and I'm comparing this to this, now this is also leaning the wrong way. This is leaning this way, that's leaning that way, but we're going to ignore that. But we first need to have the idea of, is that basic shape of the shadow the shape I need that I can then modify and come in there and go, yeah, okay, it's going to do that, it's going to do this, it's going to come in here, it's going to come out there, it's going to undulate as it comes over here, it's then going to go over there. And I think I got this a little bit off because this should tuck under there, and then that should tuck under there, and then this should tuck around there, whatever. So again, start with very simple shapes. Same thing with this. If I did this, I'd be like, look, the simplest way the shape is something about like that. Simple shape here. It's a shape, again, basically like that. There's another very thin shape here that kind of, it gets a little darker along the edge, just along this little area, and then it gets lighter. I would just go, that's that right there. And then I would modify these, okay? Because they're a little more, again, they're a little more irregular, right? And then we'd go, okay, there's a highlight here, there's a highlight there, there's a highlight here, there's a highlight there. Okay, I'd start off very lightly with that, and then again, modify it as needed. This actually stretches. This is smaller. This has a little bit, you know, it's a little bumpier, a little frumpier. You know, we can, right now it's just a little, I would start with that, again, very lightly so I can get rid of it. Because obviously they're not that square-like. What these are placeholders. These are placeholders so I can go back in there later and modify that to look even better. Okay, that's this going around the ridge. This then has, again, where we see this come over here. There's another little bit back here that we see, and this is all in shadow. Okay, so this is how we'd start this. And again, if I clarify this, because I think there's a little bit, because I had so many lines in there. This is my basic shadow side. Now remember, I didn't pull out that reflected light, but if I was going to do that right now, we'd say, okay, because of the way that this is formed, the reflected light is wrapping around this far. There's a little plane back here. This lifts up and this is down, and that it really makes that reflected light much brighter because of the way the typography, the plane changed, which would be the better way to say it, the plane change of that Pear. So this is, again, give me the shadow shape. There's the reflected light, not the highlight, reflected light. This will then come out here. This is then going to come over here. This is then going to come over there. This would be our middle value. This would be our middle value here. This would be some middle value there. And again, this would be light tones and reflected light. So go ahead and try to map out your Pear as best as you can. And I have, of course, the photograph here that I mapped from, or pretty close. It's going to be, may not be the exact same, but it's pretty close to the reference I was using, because I was actually using the Pear instead of the reference. But this will be very close. You'll be able to see this, hopefully. But try to map out your shadows, and then we would start, you know, putting in the values. And how would we start the values? Well, we start with two values, right? We start with shadow side and light side. So this right here, and then we just keep developing. In the shadow side, there'd be core shadow, there'd be dark tones, reflected light, all that good stuff. In the lights, there's middle values, lights and highlights, and the middle values have two sides, light side and a dark side, and the dark values have two sides, light side and a dark side, and then there's a core shadow where the light, you know, and light and shadow come together. There's the core shadow, and you know, we'd start to put that on there, and then, you know, then you'd have the dark tones and reflected light and all that good stuff, and we could start to turn this into a drawing, right, based on these different ideas. So go ahead and map out your shadows after you've done your contour drawing, then put a map of your shadows down, keep it light, and then turn on the video of shading the Pear, because we start off with me already having my contour done and my mapping done, and then we jump into the drawing. So go ahead and get this stage, and then you'll be ready to turn on the video and follow along with me as we turn this Pear, you know, into something with volume by putting on all those wonderful form shadows. All right, so that's what we're going to do. Go ahead and give this a shot. I look forward to, you know, having you guys follow along with me on drawing the Pear. Thank you so much for tuning in. Bye-bye now.